Well, welcome back to another episode of Make Your Mind Your Best Ally. And I have my friend and guest, Dr. Caitlyn Prickett, again with us. And today we're talking about heat.
Yes.
Temperatures are going crazy, especially in Florida where we live. It's like we almost don't want to go out.
I know. And there's so many safety things that go along with that too, which we'll discuss today.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because I've had a few friends that have gone through like really bad episodes of, I guess you would call it heat stroke, because they got taken to the hospital and they're not the same person anymore.
No.
And you know, the idea behind this podcast today is to really like make you guys think seriously about when you start feeling the effects of heat stroke and, you know, dehydration and all that. So stick to the end because this is going to be super interesting.
Yes.
So my first question, let's define the different types. Like let's start with dehydration and then heat exhaustion, heat stroke. How does it go?
Definitely. So the most basic one is going to be dehydration. That's basically a decrease in volume in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So you have lack of water, lack of fluids.
Okay.
And so this is essentially from maybe sweating too much by being exposed to a lot of heat. And so you have a depletion in volume.
Okay.
So basic symptoms are ones we know. You're going to get thirsty. You may get a little nausea.
Mm-hmm.
You may get a little feeling like you have less energy. And this is easy to fix with hydration.
Okay.
But when you're really dehydrated, plus you're exposed to heat, so a lot of heat outdoors or a lot of physical activity, that can lead to something called heat exhaustion. Now, heat exhaustion is where you have an increase in your core body temperature with some associated symptoms that are a little bit more concerning. Things like nausea, dizziness. You may notice that you're sweating a lot more than usual.
Yep.
So excessive sweating, more than just your typical sweating.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is something to be concerned about and that you should take action. So if you're noticing you're feeling some effects that you're feeling a little off.
Different.
Listen to your body. It will tell you. Then sit down, have some water, maybe, sit in a cooler area. So this is when you know something's going on. Heat exhaustion, the person can recognize it. Heat stroke is the most severe heat illness. Heat stroke can be fatal.
Yeah.
Heat stroke is when you have an elevation in core body temperature, and these are really high. This is about 40 degrees Celsius, which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh my God.
Or higher.
You're like you
higher
have a
than
fever,
104.
basically.
And so you have this elevation, but you have delirium. You have confusion. Confusion to where you're not realizing you're confused. Like you're very altered. You could even pass out or become unconscious. And this is something that not only personally you need to be aware of, but be aware of it with others too.
Yeah.
Because you can tell if a person is not acting right, they're acting confused or delirious, then that's an impending heat stroke.
Wow.
And they need to be cooled down immediately.
Yeah.
And 911 needs to be called because interventions that you and I can do are not going to be enough to cool the body down fast enough. You need, the ambulance to come, EMT, take them to the hospital. And we can get into like treatments a little bit later, but it's really dehydration is easy to fix, just drinking water. Heat exhaustion is being in heat and having some of these symptoms like nausea, not feeling right. And then heat stroke is the most severe. And typically it's other people recognizing it. You're not going to say, oh goodness, I'm having a heat stroke.
Yeah.
It's someone else, a coach, a teammate, a friend recognizing this person isn't acting right and acting immediately.
Yeah. And I am guilty of that. Guilty of thinking, oh my God, I can push it a little bit longer. But knowing that there's something wrong, there's something different about me. I'm breathing differently. I'm sweating differently. I have chills. At that point, I would say, would you say just quit, get out? Because it's I'm sure it's very easy to go from heat exhaustion to heat stroke.
And with heat stroke, you're starting to have some organ damage if it's not treated pretty quickly. You can even stop sweating when you're going through a heat stroke because your body is not able, at that point, your body's not able to cool itself down. And so it starts shutting down. It starts to preserve just those core functions that your body needs to survive, meaning your heart and your lungs. And that's why you may pass out, because your brain can take a break, because your body needs to focus on your heart pumping.
Okay.
The central circulation has to keep going. And that's why you may stop sweating. You may become unconscious because your body's trying to preserve itself.
That's so amazing. Yeah, how the body says, okay, we don't need this. We're going to keep that working.
Yes.
Incredible. Wow. Okay. So let's see. Let's talk about the consequences of going through the three issues. And let's dehydration. Let's do all three of them.
Sure. So a dehydration, of course, is a decrease in volume in the circulatory system. So circulatory system is your body's circuit for blood flow. It's how your brain is perfused. All of your organs are perfused. Every single part of our body needs oxygen, and it gets that oxygen by receiving blood. So if we don't have enough volume, not enough fluid to get throughout the body, you're going to start to see some of those effects. And that's why the first stimulus your body says is increasing thirst. You become thirsty.
Yeah.
You may notice your mouth is dry. You may notice that your skin looks a little less plump. You can actually sometimes, like in the hospital, we'll pinch somebody's like hand and see if the skin goes back down to normal or not. If it stays up and pinched, that could mean dehydration.
Oh, wow.
We also look at like capillary beds. You can squeeze somebody's fingernail and see if the pinkness comes back.
Okay.
If it doesn't, that can be a sign that you're having some volume depletion in the body. And so with dehydration, it can start to affect things like your kidneys. You can see dehydration in labs and blood work. So your electrolytes may be off, your kidneys may be starting to show a little bit of damage. There's even a severe case of patients who are exercising a lot and not drinking enough fluid, and they get something called rhabdomyolysis. Rhabdo for short. That's basically where you're having dehydration and muscle breakdown, and this molecule called myoglobin is released into the bloodstream, and it's very destructive to the kidneys. And so it'll actually cause kidney damage, can cause kidney failure. You'll see dark urine. You'll feel maybe nauseated.
Okay.
And so that is actually a very serious medical condition where you need a lot of IV fluid resuscitation. You have to be hospitalized. Sometimes patients have to be on dialysis. So that's the most extreme case of dehydration.
Wow.
But it can happen. And so that's why in the hospital, most everyone gets IV fluids. If you've ever been admitted to the hospital, unless you're having like a fluid overload issue like heart failure, where you don't need more fluid, most people get IVs because having those IV fluids really helps the body. Yep.
Wow. Yeah. So it's interesting because I remember one time that I was feeling a little weird, and the first thing they asked me was go to the bathroom and look at the urine and see if it's dark. And I was like, what does that have to do with anything? And now I understand it. It's telling you.
Definitely. Yeah. There are things you can look at. Look at your urine. See, does your mouth feel dry?
Yeah.
These simple cues that you can detect if you're adequately hydrated or not. Most of us are not drinking enough fluid throughout the day. And that's something that we all need to be mindful of, is really focusing on hydration.
Wow.
So
how much water should we be drinking?
They say 8-ounce glasses at least. That's 64 ounces throughout the day. And mostly water would be best. I mean, you can have a coffee or a tea.
But that takes away from
no soda, no diet drinks. Stick to water. Water is best for hydration for your body. That's what your body needs, is that water. For heat exhaustion, the treatment is a little bit more. So with heat exhaustion, you're going to sit down and drink some fluid, of course, but try to cool down. You can cool yourself down by loosening up your clothes. Maybe if you have a long sleeve shirt on or long pants on, take those off and that helps your body cool down, because any article of clothing on top of the skin is going to prevent the heat from dissipating.
From leaving the body. Okay.
So a lot of times loosening up clothes or removing clothes, and maybe get into a shaded area.
Right.
For heat
Does
exhaustion.
it help to put anything around your neck?
It does.
Okay.
And that's when it comes into play with heat stroke. And so heat stroke, you have to act immediately and cool the patient down as quickly as possible. So that's why any training center, any practice needs to have cooling packs or cooling blankets or access to ice, where if something happens when somebody's exhibiting heat stroke symptoms, you can act immediately and you have those resources in hand. And so putting things on top of the body can help to cool down the peripheral areas of the body, which is helpful for heat exhaustion. But heat stroke, you're really hot and you've got to cool down the core too. And it's going to take longer for ice packs or even an ice bath to cool down the core temperature. And that's why 911 needs to be called. You need to get the paramedics, EMTs involved, because they can actually infuse cooled IV fluids.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So the IV fluids have actually been cooled to a lower temperature and they're infused into the body and actually helps to cool down the core pretty quickly. Because that's the goal, is to cool down the core pretty quickly.
Yeah. So does your heart rate go down or does it go up? It
depends. So with any kind of like dehydration, that's actually one of the signs of dehydration is you have an increased heart rate.
Okay.
And because your body has less blood to get through its circulation, and so it's having to pump quicker to get the fluid, trying to get the fluid perfused throughout the entire body. So you'll see an increase in heart rate.
Okay.
With any of these, dehydration, heat exhaustion, heat stroke. And again, with the heat stroke, the patient may not be able to tell you that they may be unconscious or confused. And so that's why it's important to be mindful of what's going on around you during practices or during matches, and not to make the mistake of thinking that you're invincible and that these
that you can
things
push it a
cannot
little bit
happen to you.
longer.
High functioning, very well-trained athletes, this can happen to them.
Anybody.
It's not the person who's overweight or deconditioned. It can happen to anybody. And I think that's something to stress, is to be mindful that this can happen to anyone, even if you're the top athlete in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Be humble that, this is a human body. We're not Superman.
Exactly.
So let's talk about electrolytes and think that the things that people use, like in drinks. I've heard in the past that the more sugar those drinks have, the more difficult it is for the body to absorb it.
That is true. And something that we haven't touched on yet, but that can lead to things like heat exhaustion and heat stroke, is a lot of the energy drinks that people may drink that can overstimulate your body, overcaffeinate your body, and cause some overheating as well. Even some of the like anabolic steroids and things that people take can be detrimental too, cause you to be dehydrated, especially the energy drinks. And some of the energy pills that people take for performance can actually promote dehydration.
Oh my God. Wow.
And so making sure that you're not taking those kinds of things, trying to just drink water's best. Now, if you're in a very hot environment and you need electrolytes, and electrolyte water is okay, but it shouldn't be the primary source of your hydration.
Okay.
And again, the sugars, artificial flavors, artificial dyes, and a lot of these drinks, like your famous sports drinks, can actually cause more harm in the long run. And you don't want to add a bunch of a lot of these are filled with sugar.
Yeah, it's incredible. I used to take a little bit and then pour a bunch of water, and I'm like, okay, I'm done. I can't. It just, I'm trying to dilute it, and that's not the point. The point is I need something to help me.
Exactly. It's the hydration that you want. And so water is best. Electrolyte, drink every now and then is okay. But try to stay away from these sports drinks that are full of sugar that can affect your glucose metabolism, can affect your pancreas, can cause you more issues in the long run. You don't want to.
What about salt tablets I've heard that you can take a big piece of Himalayan salt and then drop it in water, but like how much salt is enough and how much is too much?
There's actually a lot of good studies coming out about salt, and not like your iodized salt, like your table salt that we make, but actually like Celtic sea salt, these more natural salts that have natural electrolytes in them can actually be helpful. Putting like a sprinkle in your water can actually be beneficial and help to replenish some of those electrolytes you may lose throughout the day with sweating. And this is good for non-athletes or people who aren't, high performing people.
Yeah.
Just everyday people
Right.
can benefit from adding salt, a little bit of that Celtic sea salt
Yeah.
to their foods or to their water. So there's actually good evidence with that.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. Cool. Let's see. Any other important thoughts about heat-related illnesses? Any?
Yes. So, it's important to recognize heat-related illnesses in that it can cause a lot of really bad damages to the body. So we're talking about what we call end organ damage, so like kidney damage, liver damage, and the effects can happen for a few days after.
Yes.
So that's why it's important if someone is experiencing heat stroke symptoms to get them to the hospital so they can be monitored appropriately, because it's not just about fixing the problem then, because the effects may be delayed.
That is interesting you say that, because that reminds me of someone. I used to work at this resort in North Carolina, and it was right on the beach. It was always hot. I was there during the summer, and I had a girl take a lesson from me who basically fainted on the court. And as we were talking, they were telling me they were at the beach all day long the day before and the day before that. So I can see how it just compounds. You might drink later that day, but you're already there by the time you come to the court. It took maybe 10 minutes, and I started seeing what you mentioned in the beginning. This, like, she's acting strange, she's slurring her words, and thank God I was there next to her and I grabbed her when she fell. So
being good stewards and being good team players and making sure that we're all safe in heat. And it can happen really quickly. It can happen when you're least expecting it.
Yeah.
So just being mindful, you're trying to stay hydrated, taking breaks is interesting. There's actually something called heat acclimatization, which is actually, it's been studied protocols for getting athletes acclimated to being in the heat. The most well-studied sport with this is football. So when, especially like high school football, when they're starting training, they start to practice with just the helmet on out in the heat. And then a week later, they'll put the full gear on. And then the week after that, they'll really go full force with it, getting themselves used to the heat. So if you are a tennis player and you haven't played outside for a while, or maybe you've taken a break and you're ready to get back out there and get on the courts, be mindful that you may need to acclimate yourself back up to the heat.
We talked about sauna one time, acclimatizing yourself to the heat.
Exactly. It's the same thing. You need to really be mindful that even though you're a world-class athlete or at the top of your fitness peak, the heat can really overtake you and can really cause some detrimental effects. So we need to be respectful of that and be mindful that start slow and acclimate yourself up.
Let's talk about temperature and humidity, because they always give you there's 94 degrees today, but with the humidity and everything, it brings it up to a different type of temperature. So you might be deceiving yourself if you're looking, oh, it's only 92. I'm going to go play tennis, when it's actually the humidity makes a huge difference.
It's called the heat index. And that's really what it feels like outside with this temperature plus the humidity. And it's that heat index that you really have to be mindful of, because the heat index can be 110 and then outside temperature is only 90. But you really need to look at it as it's 110 degrees outside. I really need to be mindful, be really hydrated, maybe start practicing earlier in the day or maybe later in the afternoon, not in the midday when it's going to be most profound. And they have cooling stations in cities when it's a high heat index for a reason. Because again, this can happen to anyone, and it's important to be mindful of heat indexes, be mindful of what's going on that day with your practicing or matches, and plan ahead. Plan ahead for that.
Taking off, like, if you can, like, we're in the middle of your match and your clothes are soaked. taking them off and changing them for something that's dry, it helps, right?
Definitely.
Right.
Definitely. And even the process of like removing some articles of clothing, you're releasing some of that heat naturally, because we may be in athletic wear, but there's still some heat that's still held against our skin that's trapped and not able to dissipate into the air.
Wow. Huh.
So yeah, all these things. The cooling towel helps to peripherally cool you down. Just like when you have a fever, you put like a cold washcloth on your face.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Well, we could talk forever, but we're going to leave it here. Thank you so much for all your thoughts and all your suggestions. And hopefully we're all going to have, better discipline about the heat.
Yes.
If you're in a state like Florida that is seeing temperatures that are crazy, be careful, keep playing tennis, like you said, early or late during the day. So just take care of yourself. All right. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in our next episode. Bye.
Bye-bye.